Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. Thank you for joining me again today for this very special part 2 of a 3-part episode. Back on October 25, 2023, Men Healing continued the tradition set in 2022 of recognizing that day, October 25th, as Male Survivor Awareness Day to coincide with the month of October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Well, they planned their own event. Drew Boa of Husband Material and I thought it would be good to again set up another live event this year after doing a similar event for 2022. This included participation of the Husband Material membership, specifically its subgroup fellowship for abuse survivors. Fellowship members submitted poetry and other items to be shared, some live, some previously recorded, and some read by others. The event was co-hosted by myself and Dr. Doug Carpenter, author of Secret Shame, A Survivor's Guide to Understanding Male Sexual Abuse and Male Sexual Development. This year we came up with a theme, disclosure. Why it often takes so long to tell anyone about the abuse. The goal for this event and the day in total was to help non-survivors how to understand and work with survivors to help support them on their healing journeys and to better understand the concept of disclosure, since this is often discussed in the media in the more public abuse cases. And that was the goal for our event specifically, to understand the concept of disclosure. I'm very proud to have organized this event and with the end result. Make sure you take a look at the show notes with lots of helpful links that were mentioned during the episode. Here we go with part 2 of HM's Male Survivor Awareness Day 2023.
I know that I believed as a child that and actually I'm just now having the insight to this in this very moment, so this is interesting, that there was a part of me that believed that I could not tell my mother because she would have blamed me. She would have shamed me because she was very much caught up in purity culture, and that would have been somehow me being dirty, doing something wrong that I shouldn't have done.
Well, yeah, for me, I did not disclose to my mother because my father was the abuser.
Right.
And I would kind of hint at it because there was a history of him abusing other extended family members when he was way, way much younger, before he was an adult, abusing other extended family members. And my mother knew about those things, but
Well, and
she couldn't.
incest situations are so horrible because that child constantly worries if they're going to be believed by the other
Right,
parent. I mean, this is your
right,
spouse,
right.
and mom and dad are united.
Yeah. Now,
You
my
know,
situation, I didn't remember until I was an adult
right.
for my abuse. But then hinting at it with my mother, uh, I don't think she was ever ready to hear it. But then also, I was worried if I did tell her, would she be angry enough where she would like go grab a gun, kill him, end up in jail? That's the worst case scenario that my mind goes to.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that I listed in the 40 that are in the book is one is called obligatory violence. In some Hispanic cultures, there's a belief that if someone harms your child, such as in the area of sexual abuse, it is the father's responsibility to go pay that debt, to
Right.
have revenge on that person. And there have been men disclose many years later from Hispanic populations that said, I would not disclose my abuse because I knew my dad would have to go after that person and I didn't want something to happen to my dad. I
Right.
protected my father from the obligatory violence that would have to occur if I disclosed.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a common fear. And that goes with disclosure as well. That if I tell, not what's going to happen to me, but what is going to happen to that person. So you feel that extra responsibility for that truth being shared.
Well, and
And then
perpetrators often use that too with
yes,
children, especially like if your mother is a single mother. Well, if you disclose this, what's going to happen?
right,
Because I'll have to go to jail, and then who's going to watch you? Because your mom has to work two jobs to survive. So perpetrators will guilt trip people in their abuse to believing that something bad will happen to either them or their parent if this
right,
is disclosed. Or sometimes we'll even threaten, if you disclose, I'll kill your mom.
right, exactly. Let me go back to the disclosure statements. This is from CR. He says, my CSA experience, childhood sexual abuse experience, occurred when I was around 12 to 13. It involved an older male cousin, 3 to 5 years older. I was in my early 50s before I ever disclosed this experience to anyone. I guess there were two main reasons for my delay in disclosure. For decades, I didn't identify my experience as abuse because my abuser didn't violate me physically, but he did invade and violate my childhood mind. He did things in my presence and in the presence of other boys. I think we call this non contact abuse.
Yes.
Under the guise of teaching and showing us things. For years, I didn't realize or accept that this was for his own sexual gratification, nor did I understand the extent to which this experience impacted me and my life. And
Mm.
then he continues, I carried great shame and embarrassment for being part of this experience. I was young, very sexually naive, and deeply conditioned to believe that my participation in this event was sinful, dirty, and wrong. I was ashamed that it captured my curiosity at the same time it injected my young mind with confusion, fear, and doubt about my adequacy as a boy or man, physically and in many other ways, then and throughout, during that time and throughout my life. And continues, I was deeply impacted to hear in a recent documentary about the Boy Scouts abuse scandal, I believe that's on Netflix, that many men never disclose their abuse, and many of the ones who do wait until they're in their 40s or 50s to do so. They also stated that most of the men who disclose only disclose to a spouse or someone who is extremely close to them.
Yeah. So my only problem with everything you said there was this person used my participation in this.
Hmm. And it really wasn't participation.
It was not participation.
That implies consent and a
It,
willingness.
that's right. It implies consent. And you were too young to give consent when your abuser was probably over the age of consent. You were being groomed and used for someone else's sexual gratification. That is not participation.
Yes.
That is abuse.
Yes. Thank you for catching that. Yes.
Yeah, that word just jumped out at me, like, and grabbed me. It was not participation.
Right.
Even when Daniel made this point of sometimes that he even went back and instigated the abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's not even participation. You are not of the age of consent. You cannot consent to sexual acts. If you initiate it, it is that person's responsibility to act as an adult and to not carry out that act with you.
Right.
And if this is somebody that you love and trusted, you were being manipulated. This was not you going back to participate.
Right.
That was all part of a very manipulative teen, modus operandi of the person.
Yes.
It was their method of operation to groom you, to keep you trapped and keep you coming back for more.
Yes. Very much so. Yes. Let me do one more. Chuck Jacobson says, I was 7 years of age when I was first sexually abused by my next door neighbor. A few months after that, I was abused again by the same man at the corner gas station, for I found out accidentally that he worked there. The corner gas station became the primary spot where I was abused throughout my school years. There was another time when I was 15 years old, about 3 in the morning. An intruder broke into our house. It was that same next door neighbor. He raped me in my own bed while everyone was asleep. I always blamed myself. It was always my fault. A lot of it might be because of all the threats I received from that abuser throughout the years. Because of the abuse, I also struggled immensely with same sex attraction. I absolutely couldn't stand the fact that I thought I was gay. I lived in fear. Absolutely no one could find out the real me. I was filled with extreme amounts of shame, guilt, and self condemnation. I was petrified no one could find out. It wasn't until I was 25 when I first came to the realization that I was a victim of sexual abuse. I still dealt with huge amounts of shame, guilt, and condemnation even after I realized I was abused. The fear of anyone finding out the things I've done horrified me. And again, willing participant versus groomed to do those things. So he
And I'm very
continues,
proud of Chuck for
yes,
writing that and allowing that to be shared. And
yeah,
if he was
yeah,
standing in front of me, I'd give him a big hug right
yeah.
now. And
He continues, when I
yeah,
was 28, I fell in love with an absolutely beautiful lady. Before I proposed to her, I did tell her that I was abused, but that's all the further it went. I could not fathom the thought of saying any more. The look of horror on her face scared me. Throughout our marriage, there were times that I told her little bits and pieces, but very, very little, just kind of lightly skimmed the surface. The shame, guilt, and condemnation filled my heart. A little over a year ago, at 58 years of age, I hit absolute rock bottom. I could not face my life anymore. It was there that the Lord led me to husband material, yay, the love, support, and encouragement that I have received from everyone just melted my heart. Little by little, I was able for the first time to share my stories. It was extremely scary, but every time it gets a little easier. Throughout my involvement in recovery, I became stronger and filled with hope. About 6 months ago, I sat down with my wife and my family and told them absolutely everything. I want everyone to know the extreme amounts of shame, guilt, and self condemnation devastated my life. That is the reason why it took me so long to tell anyone about my past. Thank you and God bless.
ooh, what a touching, touching story. And I'm so glad that you found your voice
Yes,
and just finally let that out and let
yes,
the world see your beauty of who you really are.
yes. Thank you. And let me do another video. We're going to see a video from Roger sharing one of three poems. The first one is Daddy, and then we'll discuss it. Hold on.
Daddy, did you love me? Daddy, did you like me? You were so big, I was so small. What did you see when you looked at me? Did I frighten you? Make you angry? Loose your demons? Did you feel better when you hit me? Were you ashamed? Sorry? Did you hold me, help me stop crying? When you saw me naked, what did you feel? Pride? Shame? Lust? I was your kid. You were my daddy. I thought I loved you. I thought you loved me. When I helped you, were you happy with me? Ashamed of me? Angry at me? What did I do wrong? Was I not good enough? Did it not help? So many questions, but now you're dead. One last question. If I had been sleeping in the house that night, would you have killed me too?
Yes, Roger has shared a story before that as an adult, it came out that his father was abusing someone, and I believe he ended up killing himself and his wife, and I believe a grandchild who was a victim. So it was a murder suicide. That's part of his story. Yeah, the poem reflects that.
Devastating.
Right. It's so confusing for a child with those memories, wondering, okay, what happened? And then as you age out, you're just discarded.
Right.
Whenever you reach whatever that age is that they have that preference for, once you age out, then you're left as worthless. And then that continues the confusion and the hurt and so
That
forth.
whole aging out thing, I think, is really prominent in the Neverland, Finding Neverland
Yes.
documentary. If
Yes.
you've not watched that, it's definitely worth watching, although, it could very possibly be very triggering for some
Right.
people. But, at least two men intricately tell their story about their abuse with Michael Jackson, and you can see in their story his Michael Jackson's constant cycle that he needed a boy between a certain age range.
Mm-hmm.
And once they would reach a certain age, he would discard them and be done with them, and he would be on to the next boy. So
Right.
that cycle is so evident in Finding Neverland. If
Right.
that's something that you're,
Right.
anybody
Leaving Neverland. Leaving Neverland, and
Leaving Neverland. Okay.
it is on Max still. It's still available. And there's an Oprah special that followed. I believe it's in the special features on there. So it's like 5 hours of content. And that was actually the thing that got me back into recovery in 2019 was that documentary.
Oh, wow.
That was the catalyst, watching that. And it's like, oh, I need to work on my stuff. And then Oprah mentioned the Male Survivor website, and I went there. That got me to Men Healing, and then continued my healing, and then found husband material and so forth. So, but that was the main catalyst for sure. We've got another. Let me do one more poem, and then we'll move on. This is from Rocky Pizer, also a husband material coach, and this is his story.
My name is Rocky Pizer. I've been asked to share for Male Survivors Awareness Day. My backstory is that there was sexual abuse that took place between the ages of 8.5 and almost 11 years old on a regular basis. And the biggest thing that I needed was when I finally chose to talk about it. I needed somebody who could just sit with my story. It took decades for me to come out with what happened when I was a little boy. It led to a lot of unwanted types of behaviors in me. So a part of the recovery I had from those unwanted behaviors was to eventually come out with my story of childhood sexual abuse. It was really difficult. It was hard to sit there and just start. And when I did start, it became a narrative that I didn't think I could stop. And it was highly emotional. And for decades, I didn't know that little Rocky needed his story told. He needed somebody with empathy and compassion to not fix him, but to hear the story and hear the experience and the devastation and the hopelessness. Because in someone hearing my story and having empathy for it, I believe I began to see that it wasn't all that hopeless. And yes, even though it was devastating, that there's a way to crawl out of that. And even though I'd carried it for decades, there was a way to release it and to begin to work through a healing process. So what I really needed was someone who wouldn't shy away from it, who would sit with me and who would ask me, what do you need? Who can I be for you right now? And I also needed some support. Support is so critical, to have community around me who gets it, and guys around me who've been a little bit further down the path and could help me understand what was going on. That was all vital for me. When you first come out with a story, you're wondering how much is true and how much was made up. And maybe all of it was made up. Is this so difficult? It feels like a nightmare, or it feels like it couldn't have really happened. But when the narrative begins, your body is saying, see, it really happened. Because the body knows. My body knew it for all those years. And so for someone to see me and know me and still love me and see me as an adult instead of a little boy was huge. I'm grateful for those in my life who sat with me. I'm grateful for those in my life who lent a hand, for those who understood, and for those who had the patience for me to work through it over years and years and years, and for me to start living on the other side of it. I'm very grateful. Now my life looks like doing the same for others, being able to give back to other little boys that are trapped in men's bodies that have a story that their adult selves are so afraid to tell. I'll sit with them, and it is amazing. Well, thank you for hearing this. I hope this is helpful, and bless you on this day. Thank you.
One thing that strikes me there is, I often think that a victim of male sexual abuse, they don't know how to have empathy for that inner child who's hurting and wounded until they see that modeled from another person.
Right.
Who then has empathy for that wounded self, that wounded inner child inside of you, that it then dawns on you that, oh, maybe I should have some empathy on my own inner child, that I'm not to blame. I didn't bring this on. I didn't participate. I was truly abused. And then you learn to have some empathy.
Right.
Another thing that I can't remember, somebody before made reference to this, and I was going to point it out. Oh, I think it was Chuck's story that he told little bit throughout the years. That's called incremental disclosure. A person is so concerned about how they will be perceived, if they will be believed, what others will think of them, the shame holds them back, that they feed you the cake one morsel at a time.
Right.
They hold this and they give you one piece at a time and see how you respond to that.
Right.
And if you can swallow that little morsel, later when I feel safe, I'll give you just one little morsel, until Chuck reached the stage where, he was 58 or whatever he said when he finally sat down and disclosed to his wife and family the full extent of his abuse.
Right.
That's called incremental disclosure.
Right.
And
I think
that happens a lot, and kids will do that too. In fact, the research shows that the kids who have the most healthy outcome are those that disclose like immediately. But often, if kids even disclose, they will do this incrementally, and they may say something like, and I use this example in my book, like they may just drop the hint like, I don't really like Uncle Johnny.
Right.
I don't like it when he's around, or I don't feel comfortable around him. And if a child says something like that, the other people around them need to inquire about that. Like, that needs to be a discussion. Tell me more about that.
Right.
Because they're incrementally trying to disclose something to you.
Right.
And there's probably a big cake back here.
Right. Yeah. And I believe I started that with my mother, and I put that one little morsel out. Remember when we found out that my father did all that stuff? What did you ever think about that? And her response was, obviously she was not wanting to talk about anything remotely to that. And
Right.
it was like, okay, not safe. Okay, well, I'm just going to take this cake and put it away.
Right. And so we test people, and
Yeah.
and if you want to tell bad enough, you test enough people that you finally find somebody who will really listen.
Right. Exactly.
You can give enough of those morsels to that they can handle hearing the story.
Right. Yes. Okay, switching gears again. This is back to the questions from the husband material community at large. This is from two individuals, but they kind of tie in, so we're going to make it one big question. First, from DB, I've often heard that CSA survivors are SSA prone, same sex attracted, because of the abuse. Is the thought that process typical for your panelists, or does it vary? So we'll pose that to the chat as well. If you want to answer that, feel free. And I'll let Doug go first, but then there's another opposite part of this, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. This is from EO. I've seen CSA male survivors abused by other men turn out not having SSA but OSA. And I'm curious how that happens and evolves. So, two parts of the same question. So, I know we mentioned earlier that the abuse often leads to acting out sexually, and then there's two prongs to that: acting OSA, vetting as many women as you can just to prove your masculinity, or you go the SSA route where you're going to just reenact the abuse, even though it's more men having sex with men, then they might not even label themselves as homosexual per se, but still have sex with other men. Versus the other extreme of that, those are the two sides of the same extreme. You become completely non sexual, asexual.
Well, and it can happen both ways. And I can't tell you who's going to end up, like I believe it was Dan said that he, it flipped that switch and it turned on sexual curiosity for,
And he was kind of both.
you
Yeah.
know, and there are men that it can turn on the same sex attraction. For me, it turned on same sex attraction.
Right. Likewise.
I think the reason for that for me was once I realized what my abuser had done to me and that he caused me to have an orgasm, that I then, once I figured out that that was an orgasm, it took me a few days and I thought, I wonder if I can make myself do that. And so then I started doing it to myself. But I was raised in a very strict Christian home where the thought of lusting after a girl or having a sexual thought about a girl was a very very big sin. And so when I first started masturbating, I would do it to fantasies of what my abuser had done to me.
Right.
And so I think that began to solidify sexual thoughts and feelings associated with males.
Right. I know when I shared my story with Drew a year and a half ago, I mentioned that was very common with survivors, that you eroticize the abuse, you sexualize the abuse, and try to reenact it, sometimes subconsciously, especially if it's repressed, and then it's that leaky vault again, that dirty lens you're seeing things through that's informing how you respond, how you act.
Yep, for sure.
Let me go back to more disclosure statements. This is Rocky Pizer again. He gave us a text version as well. 38 years before I disclosed, it happened for 2+ years, the abuse, from age 8.5 years old. It was at a house I went to after school to be watched by older boys. I didn't disclose to my parents because my mom had anger issues and would beat me. Dad worked 6 to 7 days a week, and I didn't know him well enough. I just became a self reliant sex addict from then on until my sexual addiction recovery began 37 years later. It took me about 1 year meeting with a counselor before I disclosed. Anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just another great example of why men hold on to this for so long. And it's not till something in life happens that is again traumatic or that brings all of this out, and then they end up having to disclose, as part of their own healing or their treatment.
Right, exactly.
Or something about their behavior has gotten them in trouble in a relationship or even legally, that then you start digging at, okay, what's the, as we use in husband material, the idea of the origin story. What's the origin story of this behavior and this problem?
Right, exactly. And Dan says in chat, totally resonates with Rocky's story. Let me do one more. This is from Larry. Larry says, it took me around 42 years to disclose to a pastor. Still on the 14-year journey of learning who I am because of the abuse and how it has affected me. I was 5 to 6, ages 5 to 6 when it happened, plus stuff after, but I blocked it as much as I could, but the damage was done. Yeah.
Yeah, blocking it, denying it, pushing it away like it doesn't exist. None of that works.
Right. Yeah, let me go to a Another video. This is another poem from Roger called I Believed.
And I believed. You said I was too small, and I believed. You said I looked funny, and I believed. You said I was too clumsy, and I believed. You said I was too dumb, and I believed. You said I talked nonsense, and I believed. You said I was worthless, and I believed. You said my body was yours, and I believed. You said it was right, and I believed. You said you were the dad, and I believed. You said wrong was right, and I believed. I grew up believing lies. The trouble with lies is truth, and truth is not ruined by scrutiny. You fathered me, but I had no dad.
Yeah,
Very sad.
right.
Very true.
Yes. Please join us next time as we conclude with part 3 of HM's Male Survivor Awareness Day 2023. I'll see you then. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarliveconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled P-O-L-A-R. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.